Hello everyone, I hope your first week of critical thinking is going well and that you are enjoying the readings and starting to get into those threaded discussions. Before I get into the material that I had prepared for us this evening, I wanted to take a few minutes and talk about sort of the rhythm of the class, managing the course load. I think returning to school, that can be something overwhelming at best for students. So I wanted to just take a few minutes and talk about managing that workload. So remember, our class weeks always begin on a Tuesday. So I tell students use Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday to get into the classroom, to look around, take a look at what the assignments are for the week, and then get your readings done. You really need to do the readings first in order to be able to participate in those threaded discussions, as well as those written assignments and then the reflections as you move through the week. So use Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday to become acquainted with what those assignments are and to get those readings out of the way, the readings for the week out of the way. And then use Thursday, Friday, and Saturday to do your initial postings in those threaded discussions, meaning take that time to answer the questions there that I've posed for you, those 3 threaded discussions. And then use Saturday, Sunday, and Monday to respond to your classmates. Remember, you have to respond to at least 2 classmates in each one of those discussions. And I will be in there interacting with all of you as well. So use Saturday, Sunday, and Monday as a chance to log in and interact with each other. You're also going to want to use the weekend to work on that reflection paper. They're usually 1 to 2 page reflection papers. They may be an article review, something where you can apply the learning, the concepts that we've been discussing in that week. So most students don't work on the weekends, so they like to use the weekends to do the additional work. And then on Monday, you can use Monday to finish up everything and make sure the paper's uploaded in the Dropbox, and use Monday as a day to kind of reflect that final threaded discussion that asks you to look back on the week and think about what are your big takeaways? What's the big learning that you've taken away? So that's how I like to suggest to students to kind of break up their week. Now, I always say I think it takes the first 1 or 2 classes to really get that rhythm, if you will, of when, do you do it on lunch break? Are you a morning person? Do you get up an hour earlier? Do you stay up an hour later? Do you not watch your favorite TV show or sports team? And use that time to focus on your work. So again, I know that this is new for all of us. We're all in this together. So just wanted to offer those pieces just to ensure just some little tips and helpful pieces that I hope you'll find helpful as you begin maneuvering through the course load and managing that course load. So this week, if you haven't gotten into the reading already, I hope that you noticed that we are focusing on critical thinking. How this course is divided up, the first half of the course, weeks 1, 2, and 3, we're going to focus on critical thinking. And then weeks 4, 5, and 6, the final half of the class, we're going to focus on systemic thinking and the relationship that both critical thinking and systemic thinking share. So tonight, I just want to discuss the critical thinking piece and focus on what critical thinking is and why is it important? Why does it matter? So take a few minutes, if you will, and jot down on a piece of paper who the best critical thinkers are that you know. Maybe it's someone you currently know. Maybe it's someone you knew years ago. Just take a few minutes and just jot down their names. Who are the best critical thinkers that you know? Now take a few minutes and consider, why do you think that those individuals are critical thinkers? Why did they come to your mind? Why did you automatically select those people when you were thinking about defining critical thinking? And then I want you to take a few minutes to think about, who are the weakest critical thinkers that you know? And then perhaps the most important question that I want you to consider out of this series: what are the differences between these 2 groups of individuals, the critical thinkers and the weak thinkers, the weak critical thinkers. What are the biggest differences that you're seeing there between those two groups? Jot those thoughts and ideas down. Keep those ideas to the forefront as you're doing the readings this week, as you're doing the threaded discussions. And think about how you define critical thinking. Going through these questions will help you consider what your definition of critical thinking is, and why you think that your definition does in fact define a critical thinker. Oftentimes I find it helpful to define something by first thinking about what it is not. So here on this slide I have posted for us is critical thinking and what critical thinking is not. So first, it is not done alone. We know that critical thinking is collaborative in nature. So if you're not collaborating with other individuals, other people that have differing perspectives and views than you, then you know that critical thinking is not taking place. Critical thinking is not something done alone. Critical thinking is not used to win an argument, because solving problems is the key in critical thinking. Critical thinking is not used to justify one's position, because when one is truly applying critical thinking, that individual is considering all the perspectives in order to build a sound argument. So it's not about making oneself appear right. It's about getting the best decision by considering all perspectives, not just one perspective or two perspectives. It's taking an active role in trying to consider as many perspectives as possible. So this is just a quick way as we begin to think about what critical thinking is and how we define that. We know that it's not done alone, it's not used to win, and it's not used to justify someone's position. So the process of critical thinking. Okay, I think that we all understand, if just by saying the term critical thinking, we all have an idea in our minds of what that means in theory. But when we begin to unpack that and dig deeper, I think we end up with more questions than we have answers at that point, or at least a number of questions certainly emerge for us as we're unpacking that definition of critical thinking. So first we have to think, is critical thinking and creative thinking the same? And is critical thinking related to academic achievement, or is it just a part of the academic process? So as we dig deeper and deeper in this, these are some of the questions that begin to rise to the surface. So is there a difference between thinking critically and creatively? We'll explore that question. We have some case studies that we'll do in over the course of our time together in this course. And we'll think about the difference between academic achievement and critical thinking. Is that part of academic achievement? Or is critical thinking simply part of the academic process? And we're also going to take it a step further and explore, is it part of the leadership process? Is it part of organizational success? So I think you'll see this concept of critical thinking being applied both in the personal realm, in addition to the organizational realm as well. And we're going to talk about that relationship that exists between those. So we have some core critical thinking skills that I think most of us can agree when one is a critical thinker, when one is utilizing critical thinking skills. These are some skills that one has sharpened. So when you think of your own, where you are as a critical thinker, think about where you would rate yourself on these different, on these various core critical thinking skills. So first we have interpretation. You're able to interpret something. Remember, there's so many times, particularly in our personal lives and our organizational lives, where we can hear something, but we're able to really interpret that. We know that maybe what's being said or what's written may not be the real meaning, or there may be something deeper to that there. Also, the interpretation piece means that you're sometimes you have to view things from another perspective, right? How I would describe something is going to be different than perhaps you would describe something. So understanding the perspective of the communicator will help that interpretive process. So a critical thinker is able to interpret situations, interpret the true meaning. And with that comes a level of analysis. A critical thinker is able to analyze a situation, to kind of get to the core or the root issue, and kind of, peel away those layers like an onion of a situation and be able to analyze for the true, what's really there, the core. There's an evaluation that becomes a core critical thinking skill. A critical thinker is able to evaluate and not just take something on face value. We all have had situations, and we evaluate things every day. When we prioritize things, what are we going to do first? Your process of understanding how to manage your classwork, you're doing some evaluation there. Understanding how that's going to fit in, how it's all going to come together. And there's inference as well. What's inferred when we're talking? A critical thinker is able to understand that, infer meaning in things and kind of look beyond what is just presently in front of them, to be able to understand perspectives and framework for things. There's an explanation piece, again, to the critical thinker. It's not just about being able to intake information, but it's being able to take that information, analyzing that, evaluating that, inferring the meaning, interpret that, and then turning around and being able to explain it to others. So you're able to take in information as well as take that information and then be able to explain that as well. And there's also a self-regulation piece, and I love that this is added to a core critical thinking skill. In that one that applies critical thinking knows how to regulate, that you don't go too far. We have all heard people say, you can overanalyze something. So there's that self-regulation where you keep that healthy balance between all of these skills, and you're able really to understand the process and then regulate that process so you don't kind of become consumed by the process, but yet you're able to successfully wade through the information to come through on the other side with some clear meaning and understanding. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this slide here, but it just gives you a little bit of background when there was a Delphi method study that was conducted a while ago. So believe it or not, let me just back up for a minute. Believe it or not, this discipline of studying critical thinking and being able to quantify and qualify critical thinking is relatively new. The study of critical thinking began I think mankind in general, humankind in general, has always been curious about why we think the way we do and wanting to ponder deep issues and what's the meaning of life and so forth. But really being able to understand the process of critical thinking and how one becomes a critical thinker and can grow in critical thinking really came to the forefront in the academic discipline in the 1970s and has just kind of grown. So it's relatively new as far as defining critical thinking and understanding how one can develop as a critical thinker. So the Delphi method study that was conducted really was looking to identify and define core skills and dispositions of a critical thinker. Because again, as I said earlier, we could all sit around a table and throw out different ideas of characteristics and skills and traits of a critical thinker. But these academics really wanted to ensure that there was a kind of a go-to definition, if you will. What does it really mean at the core to be a critical thinker? So the study suggested that the critical thinker must have a critical spirit. I want to pause just for a moment and talk about that term critical. I think sometimes in our English language that it doesn't do justice at times because the word critical is negative in connotation. So it's not, at least in the English language, it's certainly not a positive term at all. So when we talk about having a critical spirit, I know for many the first thing that comes to mind is someone that's always putting something down or complaining. But instead, let's broaden our definition a little bit for the purpose of this class when we talk about the word being critical or one being having a critical spirit. What the real definition, or what we really mean by that, is that these individuals with a critical spirit are not complaining all the time, are not ungrateful, are not sassy or rude, but in fact they have a probing inquisitiveness, a keenness of mind, a zealous dedication to reason, and a hunger or eagerness for reliable information. Well, that certainly just turns the whole table on this critical spirit piece, right? Particularly how, in the framework of the English language, how we interpret that term critical. So I think that if we can, again, just for the next 6 weeks, when we talk about being critical, a critical thinker, having a critical spirit, I'd like us to really begin to frame that and internalize what that means for us. Having a probing inquisitiveness, keenness of mind, zealous dedication to reason, and a hunger or eagerness for reliable information. I think those are important pieces. So in all my time of teaching about critical thinking and wanting, obviously, to develop myself as a critical thinker, I have come across dozens and dozens, maybe even hundreds, of definitions of critical thinking. But this definition of critical thinking, to me, is perhaps one of the strongest and best. It's my favorite. We'll just leave it at that. My favorite definition of critical thinking. So for the remainder of the 6 weeks that we're in this class, I would love for us, when we talk about critical thinking, I would love for us to think about it in these terms, in defining it this way. That critical thinking is skeptical without being cynical. It is open-minded without being wishy-washy. It is analytical without being nitpicky. Critical thinking can be decisive without being stubborn, evaluative without being judgmental, and forceful without being opinionated. I just love that definition. So, at its core, this is what I want us to focus on. The 16 months that you're enrolled in this program, I want each and every one of you to develop as critical thinkers and to embody this definition here. I hope the journey in these next 16 months will help you be more open-minded without being wishy-washy, that it will help you be more analytical without being nitpicky, that you can be decisive without being stubborn, that you'll be able to be evaluative without being judgmental, and forceful without being opinionated. So I'm excited about that journey and watching each of you grow as critical and systemic thinkers. And then when we get to the final half of this course, then thinking about how we can apply these ideas to organizations, it just becomes a brilliant display of a healthy organization. And again, as we move through the next several weeks, we're going to connect these ideas to really make that clear about why this concept of critical thinking becomes then so vital within organizations. So I'm really excited about how this will all come together for us. So I'd like to take a few minutes here and talk about, at this point I always have students say, okay, yeah, I see critical thinking being meaningful to the individual, but critical thinking within organizations, I don't know, how does that play out? Well, I just have some quick examples here for you that we can talk about. So these are examples of critical thinking and organizations, or I should say a lack thereof of critical thinking and organizations. The first one, I'm sure we're all very familiar with this, BP and the oil spill in the Gulf that happened a few years ago. And again, I won't spend much time on this example. I think we've all probably talked about this numerous times, about the lack of critical thinking. The piece of the oil rig that had split, that no one had taken the time to critically think about the what ifs of going wrong on an oil rig and the destruction that brings. Is just mind-numbing. When as that was going, day after day of the oil leaking, and more came to the surface of BP and their team, they literally had no answers and finally had to say, after however many days, too many to count, we don't know how to stop this. And they were just kind of trying everything. So that actually is an example of a lack of critical thinking within an organization with huge consequences to the economy, to the wildlife, to the environment. So it's not just that, critical thinking, you don't get your way in the boardroom. No, we're talking about a lack of critical thinking having some pretty dire consequences, not only just on the organization itself, but in the world in general. So I guarantee that BP will never make that mistake again, and hopefully they'll begin utilizing some critical thinking and trying to get a bigger picture perspective on what possibly could go wrong in some of these scenarios. The next example is Circuit City, and some of you may be familiar or have heard of this example. This was really another example of a lack of critical thinking, for sure. Circuit City was experiencing a decline, a quarterly decline that had happened over 2 quarters in sales in their entertainment, TVs, that sort of area or department. So they wanted to investigate to find out what the problem was, what's going on. So as they were exploring, they discovered that the individuals, the customers that were coming and purchasing the TVs and home entertainment systems, they weren't spending very much time with the personnel that were working there. So in doing, they did some surveys and questioned the customers, and what they found out was that the questionnaire just asked about how much time they spent with the employees in that area, in that department, and if they found them helpful. The surveys came back that they did not spend very much time. In fact, most of the surveys came back that they spent under 5 minutes with individuals in that department before they made the purchase. So Circuit City said, okay, I think we know what our problem is. I think we have too many personnel in our home entertainment department. There were massive layoffs in Circuit City as a whole. They cut the employees that worked in that department to 1/3 of what it had been. What they found in the next quarter was even worse than the 2 previous quarters. Sales were declining even more. They scratched their heads and they said, well, I don't know what's going on. They did another survey. They found out that people weren't buying because there weren't knowledgeable people in the department. So the whole problem all along was not that they had too many employees, they didn't have knowledgeable employees. So it ended up costing Circuit City 3 times the amount of money by laying off, firing all these people, doing more research to find out, hiring people back. A lot of the old people did not come back, the people that they had previously fired. Then implementing training, more thorough training. People were leaving Circuit City and going to other their competitors where they felt that their competitors had more highly trained staff. Again, this whole fiasco for Circuit City took place over about a year. They lost hundreds of thousands of dollars. If they would have considered or wanted to look critically at perhaps everything that had happened, maybe if they would have talked to the employees, maybe they would have found out that they weren't as trained. If they would have dug deeper with the customers to find out. Again, we have another organization not utilizing critical thinking and not being successful. Are you seeing the link here? Critical thinking and successful organizations go together. Fresh and Easy. Probably have never heard of the Fresh and Easy grocery store chain. Fresh and Easy is a chain of grocery stores in Europe. And they had the idea that they would want to they wanted to expand to the United States. And so they thought California would be a great place to introduce their concept of fresh produce, fresh baked goods, and fresh meats. Kind of simple, streamlined shopping. So as opposed to, they did very little market research before they opened. They opened 5 stores right away throughout California, Central and Southern California. And within the first quarter, they certainly were not making the sales that they had anticipated. Fresh and Easy had no idea about the habits of the American shopper. Once the stores were open, they were stunned by the weekly or bi-weekly grocery shopping habits that most Americans use. They were stunned by the weekly flyers that most grocery stores in the United States send out. They were stunned by couponing that the American shopper does. They were also stunned that American shoppers oftentimes would visit more than one grocery store if an item were on sale. See, the Fresh and Easy model was set in the European model, and they were used to shoppers coming to shop on a daily basis for a meal at a time. So they did not have flyers, they did not have weekly specials, they would have daily specials. It was not conducive to the American culture of grocery shopping. Needless to say, Fresh and Easy, they ended up closing I believe it was in a year, maybe a year and a half, and Fresh and Easy no longer exists in Southern California. Again, a third example of critical thinking and organization, critical thinking not being utilized within an organization, and the organization failing. If Fresh and Easy would have taken a little time to do a little market research, again, remember, going back to those characteristics of a critical thinker, getting a broad perspective, being able to analyze information. None of this happened within any of these examples. We could probably spend the rest of the 6 weeks we have together talking about these examples where critical thinking was not utilized within an organization with kind of some dire consequences. You probably have several examples from your own organizations that you're either a part of now or you have been a part of. So, critical thinking and organizations matter. As we move through the next 6 weeks, we'll be making stronger and stronger connections. We'll not only talk about the failures, but I will talk about ways to equip you as managers and leaders within the organization to utilize critical and systemic thinking, ways to graph and chart and think about problems within an organization so that your organization or your stint in leadership does not become a BP or a Circuit City or a Fresh and Easy story in a class years from now. So that's where we're headed with this class. I hope you're excited about it. I am thrilled. This class is one of my favorite classes to teach. I think critical thinking, systemic thinking, and the way that they fit together really becomes a fundamental, I think, for a healthy organization. And we'll talk about those layers as we go through the next 16 months about the layers that make up a healthy organization, how to diagnose an organization. But I think the first piece of this is this critical thinking piece. This is just kind of a fun, neat acronym that I like to share with students called the RED model of critical thinking. So I want to challenge you all in this week, in your workplace, in your churches, in your volunteer groups, in your family, in your personal life. I want you to try to take at least one opportunity to utilize the RED model of critical thinking. This is something that can be done immediately. As soon as you get done listening to this, you can immediately begin applying this in your organization, in your personal life. So first, you have to recognize the assumptions. What are the assumptions being made in whatever the situation is? Then, evaluate the arguments. Be able to really pull them apart and unpack them and think about the meanings that are in there. And then thirdly, draw conclusions. This will take you through in a quick way of remembering READ, the acronym READ, recognize assumptions, evaluate arguments, and draw conclusions, will begin to bring you through that critical thinking process. So again, I want to challenge you to at least take one time to utilize that during this coming week. And then looking ahead. Again, as you're planning the rest of the week from now through Monday at 11:59 p.m., I want you to complete the threaded discussions that are found in week 1. Complete your reading assignments, which I'm sure most of you have started on those if you haven't completed them already. Complete your written assignment for week 1 and begin to work on APA. That's how we're going to start formatting the work. I'll spend a little bit of time next week in a session like this just talking about APA and the formatting and why we use it and all of that. But begin to engage that APA writing process. Begin practicing that in your threaded discussions, in your written assignment for week 1. And as always, please feel free to email or call me. I'm here to help. I'm here as your guide. I'm here to partner with you through this learning journey. So please use me as a resource. I will certainly be in the classroom. I'll be engaged in those threaded discussions. I'm looking forward to some great discussions. We have a great group of students here. So again, I hope you have a great week as you continue to explore the concept of critical thinking and begin to put together your own definition of critical thinking and begin to set some goals for yourself as a critical thinker. Have a great week, and I'll see you online.